Okay, this is a video I've decided to put together to show how to install cams or check cam timing on any of the Polaris ProStar twin cam motors. Seems like I've read a lot of requests on the forum for people looking for videos on how to do this, and there doesn't seem to be much information out there. So since I'm putting my motor back together, I've decided just to throw a quick video together, put it up, and hopefully it'll help people out there. So to start, in this example, this is my 2014 1K turbo. Has a KNT turbo, 1065 Alba big bore kit. This will be the same whether you have modified your motor or you're doing bone stock. A couple of things to start off with that you'll hear a lot when you read posts about people looking for information on how to do this. You'll hear people talk a lot about bringing your PTO cylinder to top dead center, aligning your flywheel mark, and whatnot. So when people talk about your PTO cylinder, that's going to be your cylinder here, driver's side. You're going to bring that piston up to top dead center. I'm going to be using a Phillips screwdriver to do that. Okay, over here we have my old crank sitting on the table. I have not pulled the flywheel off of it yet. It makes it real easy to see the mark that you'll be looking for when you're installing your cams or doing your cam timing. This is the hash mark that you'll be looking for. That should be at the 12 o'clock position while you're doing your cam timing. That mark is visible through the crank sensor hole when you remove your crank sensor. There is two marks on this flywheel. One of them you do not want to use when you're doing your cam timing. This mark right here, it's a little triangle looking mark, is also on there as well. Again, that is the mark you do not want to use when you're doing your cam timing. You'll want to use that straight hash mark right there. Really quick here, I wanted to show everybody where your crank keyway for the flywheel and your timing mark should be if you don't have any issues. So of course here you see the keyway on the crank. That is at the 12 o'clock position. As well above here you can see your hash mark on the flywheel. There are cases where you could shear the keyway on the crank, in which case this flywheel will rotate to a different position on the crank that it's not supposed to be. So be aware if you're having issues timing your cams, this is one thing you want to look at. Make sure you haven't sheared your key off your crank. Okay, just for some reference here, this is the position your crank key should be in with your PTO at top dead center. Whether you're looking at it this way with the flywheel on, this is where your flywheel mark will be. Also at the 12 o'clock position with the flywheel installed. This is the portion on the engine you'll be lining up to. Whether you have your stator cover on or off, this is still the position you will align to. Okay, so here we are with my flywheel on. Right now my PTO cylinder is at top dead center. This is the exact position you're going to want your flywheel and crank in when you're installing your cams or verifying your timing. You can see the flywheel mark right there. It's at the 12 o'clock position. It's lined up with this portion of the case, and again this will be visible through the crank sensor hole when you remove your sensor, or in my case with the stator cover off, you'll be able to visual it that way. One thing to note here on these ProStar engines, if you have an 11 or 12 900 XP, you don't align the mark to this 12 o'clock position. Where it will be aligned is down here on the side, right here at the case split. So you'll want the mark that's at the 12 o'clock position down here in this position when your cylinder is at top dead center. That's very important. The hash mark generally looks the same, but that's the position you'll want it on 2011 and 2012 900 XPs. One other thing to note, some of the 2012 900 XPs had the later model flywheel. Some of them will require it to be in the 12 o'clock position. The one way to verify this is if you're trying to line it at the hash mark with your PTO at top dead center and things just aren't lining up correctly. Most likely it's because you have the newer flywheel, in which case the hash mark will need to be at the 12 o'clock position, not at the case mark. Okay, right now I'm going to drop my exhaust cam in first. Something you'll notice a little differently here is I have the sprockets on my camshaft still. The reason I did that is because I didn't want to buy another set of cam sprocket bolts. They're one-time use only bolts, so once they're used once, you need to replace those with brand new bolts. So I decided to leave my sprockets on. You can get the cams in time with them on. It's a little bit trickier, and I'll show you how I do it. The best way to do it though is with the sprockets off. It's easier to get the cams timed. So right now, currently, I have my PTO cylinder here. It's at top dead center. Down low, I have my flywheel position. The hash mark on the flywheel is at the 12 o'clock position, viewed through the crank sensor hole. And we'll go ahead and get this first cam in there. I usually stick a magnet on the chain to hold it. You can use a paper clip or anything you need to hook it from keeping it from dropping down there. So I'll take a look at my timing marks there, just get it in the ballpark. And what I like to do is pull the slack up here on the front side of the motor and then run it over the cam. I'll come over here to the side, make sure I get my timing marks lined up with the top of the head. So right now, my exhaust cam is in, the chain is on there. We'll look around to the other side now and you can see where I have those timing marks at. So here you can see my exhaust cam is in. I'm pulling tension on this chain to take the slack out of the front side of the motor. You can see both my E marks. They're aligned with the top side of the head. That's also where you'll want the I marks on your intake cam as well. So we'll install the intake cam right now. Okay, before I align this intake cam, one thing I do like to do first is get the hold downs on when I have an opportunity. So we'll go ahead and put the exhaust on. Basically this is to keep that cam locked down so the cam doesn't jump up while I'm trying to move the intake camshaft. I don't torque them down right now. I basically just get it snug. So basically this cam is in here now. It won't jump up. It will want to do that as you're fighting with the intake cam here. Okay, so what I've done here is I have the exhaust cam in place and it is lined up. My E marks are lined up with the top of the head. I do have that temporarily locked down. I'm going to go ahead and remove that. As you can see, the cam is still lined up just based off the notch at the end of the camshaft as well. You can see how far the intake cam is off. Being that the sprockets are on, in essence what I'm going to do is purposely turn the motor back so I could drop this intake cam and get it aligned generally in the same orientation as the exhaust cam. Basically I'm going to anticipate where my intake cam marks are going to fall. It does take a couple of tries because the sprockets are on, but it is not that hard to do. Let's take a look here at the other side. Okay, as you can see here, again, my exhaust cam is lined up perfectly. You can see my intake cam, the eye marks there are quite a few teeth off. That cam basically has to come around counterclockwise a bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to turn the motor and purposely throw off that exhaust cam slightly, and I will position the eye mark here generally in the same position that the E mark is. That way when I do rotate the motor back, it should theoretically be lined up with the top of the head here. So we'll go ahead and do that. So as you can see here, again, my E mark is still slightly off there at about the 11 o'clock position. Now I've moved my intake cam to match that position. When we move the motor back and put the flywheel back to the 12 o'clock position, with the flywheel mark. Again, PTO at top dead center. Theoretically, my E marks should be lined up, as well as my I marks on my intake cam. Before we do that, I'll go put the cam hold down on the intake cam. Okay, so you can see here, I have the cams locked down. None of the bolts are torqued yet in case I need to go back in there. And I have the bar that I've made ready to lock these cams down. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and turn the motor over, get this locking bar in on the cams, and then we'll re-verify the timing marks on this side. I'm going to go ahead and use the primary clutch to turn it, even though technically I'm turning it in the wrong direction. Clockwise, I'll just take care not to jump the chain on the sprockets. If you do jump the chain, you'll have to go through and do it all over again. It is a little tricky. Just be patient with it. Okay, now you can see we have our bar locked into both slots. Our chain is still on there. We'll go do a quick check initially, see where our marks are falling out, and if they look good or pretty close to being good, we'll go ahead and put the cam chain tensioner in, spin the motor over, and verify it one last time to make sure our marks did not change. Okay, as you can see here, our marks are pretty close to being in the ballpark. My E marks are pretty much aligned with the top of the head, as well as the I marks on the intake cam. The reason why they are slightly advanced is because I don't have the cam chain tensioner in yet. So you will have this little bit of slop until you get some tension on that chain. The main thing that is important is that you have both your cams locked down so this doesn't move. At this point, the way the cams are right now, as I stated earlier, the mag intake lobe is slightly opening that valve. So there is pressure on there. This cam is wanting to rotate clockwise right now. If I didn't have that bar in there locking it down, it would rotate and skip on this chain, just on the intake side. So what we'll do right now is we'll get the cam chain tensioner in, rotate the motor over, and re-verify our marks. I'm using Alba cam chain tensioner. It's the auto tensioner. This is their heavier duty option of the two. More specific for aggressive cams. I got some turbo cams in here. Right now it's locked in, so I'll go ahead and pull that out, put some tension on the chain, and again, we'll verify the marks. Okay, we'll go ahead and put some tension on the cam chain right now. So I pulled my little locking key out of the tensioner, and you can see up here how immediately it put a little more tension in the chain. We'll go ahead and start rotating the motor and see where our timing marks fall out. Before I do that, I like to get the upper chain guide on so that way it won't skip. Okay, I have my upper chain guide on right now. This may look a little different than typical 1000 XP upper chain guides. What I've done is this is the upper chain guide for the Polaris turbos. It goes around your exhaust cam a little bit. It does help with the potential for the chain to start jumping on that sprocket. Does a better job of keeping it in place. It is interchangeable. I like the idea of it going around the sprocket, so basically I ordered it over the counter from my Polaris dealer and put it on my non-turbo, which is technically now a turbo. You'll notice there's still a little bit of slop in that chain. And the reason for that is if you look over towards the back, I still have the bar in the slots on both camshafts, locking that down. Once I remove that, the cams will want to turn slightly because one of them is under pressure again on the intake valve of the mag cylinder. So we'll go ahead and remove that now. Okay, basically right now what I've done is I've removed the bar that I had locking the camshafts down, and as you can see, like I stated, it immediately wanted to turn the cams. The reason for that again is because here on the intake mag cylinder, the intake side, those lobes are partially opening up those valves. So once you pull your bar out to unlock the cams, right away it wants to spin the motor forward and get it off of that valve spring. You'll also notice down here that my mark is no longer aligned to 12 o'clock, which is normal. It's basically down here. Of course the motor turned, so that is the reason for that. And this is what makes it really critical. Once you have everything in place, locked down, turn the motor over a couple of times and then bring the PTO back up to top dead center, line up your flywheel mark here, and then verify at that point that your intake and exhaust cam timing marks are aligned with the top of the head. That's what we'll do right now. Okay, we're going to go ahead and turn the motor now over. As you can see, I have my long Phillips screwdriver in the PTO cylinder. That'll make it easy for me to know if I'm coming around to top dead center or not. I'll come over here to the clutch. I'll spin the motor counterclockwise. You always spin the motor counterclockwise or you risk jumping timing on your cams. Here we're coming up on the exhaust stroke of the PTO. That is not what we want, so we'll want to come around completely again one more time. Now we're coming up on the compression stroke of the PTO, or basically top dead center of the PTO. Once I start getting close to top dead center, I slow down a bit. This could be a little tricky because once you come to top dead center, it'll want to spin the motor over because again, you're opening up that valve on the mag cylinder. If you're really careful, you can get it to top dead center and the motor will stay in place. I'm really close to top dead center right now, so I'll go take a look at the mark on the flywheel and see if we're in the 12 o'clock position. Okay, so I've come over here to the other side. I have my PTO at top dead center. As you can see, there's my flywheel mark at the 12 o'clock position, lined up with this portion of the case. If you come up here and look at the cams, you can see that both my E marks and both my I marks are generally lined up with the top of the head. This is exactly where you want it for your cams to be in time. PTO cylinder at top dead center, flywheel mark at the 12 o'clock position at this case position, and that's where you'll want your marks at. Again, one thing to note, as I stated earlier, if this is a 2011-2012 900 XP, you'll want this flywheel mark down here at the case split. Everything else will be the same. So right now I'll go ahead and torque down all my bolts because I'm done doing the cam timing. In summary, basically what you're looking for, whether you're installing cams or verifying your cam timing, is having your PTO cylinder at top dead center. At the same time, you'll want your hash mark on the flywheel at the 12 o'clock position, either looking at the flywheel with the stator cover off or looking through the crank sensor hole. At that point, the timing marks on both your intake and exhaust cams should be lined up with the top of the head. Okay, I've got everything torqued down. I'm going to go ahead and get the valve cover on this thing, throw the stator cover on, get some oil and coolant in it, and fire this thing up. Hopefully that information helps you guys with doing your own cam installs or cam timing checks.